Alright, Crim 11, let's knock out this chapter 16 on juvenile corrections. A lot of this is stuff that we've already talked about, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this chapter. We know what probation is. I hope. Community-based corrections. This is anything where a person is receiving correctional services in the community, meaning not in an institution or correctional facility. Again, here's your definition of probation, which again we've talked about before. I'm not going to focus on it real heavily, but if you need to pause, you can pause it and write that down. We've talked about juvenile probation, what they do. We talked about the fact that an intake officer is a probation officer who's the first person who actually looks at a police report after a police agency has written it. So in the juvenile world, instead of the police department sending a police report directly to the prosecution or the DA's office, they're going to send it to probation, and an intake officer in the probation department is going to read that report and decide whether or not to send it to the DA for filing. We've talked about different types of caseloads, all that kind of stuff. We talked about supervision, again, caseloads, surveillance, all that kind of stuff. And of course, a balanced approach is probably best when dealing with juveniles. You want to protect the community, you want to provide accountability, and you want to help the juvenile to become a positive member of society. Restorative justice, we've talked about this. This is the one where I kind of talk about sit down, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya. But anyways, this is when the victim and the offender get together and they work out a deal informally so that the courts are not involved. And this is a concept to make the community and the offender whole. We know that probation officers write social study reports. I know we've talked about that in class. I'm going to kind of skip through all this stuff. These are some programs that are utilized by probation departments. You can see volunteer work, community service, youth court, drug court, 4-H programs, curfew requirements, restorative justice, mentoring, alcohol counseling, job training, you name it. So these are all programs that are typically utilized by local probation departments. Then you ask yourself, do juveniles on probation have any rights? I paused that for a minute. Now I forgot where I was. But okay, do probationers have rights? Yes, they do. Typically, it's a court process in order to revoke or take back someone's granted probation. Okay, and I think we talked about this too. I'm pretty sure. What's next? Effectiveness of probation. Okay, my feelings aren't going to get hurt. What do you think? How effective is probation? Yeah, it just kind of depends on the probationer, to be real honest with you. If you have a caseload of 1,000 clients, then it's pretty unlikely you're going to be able to have much impact on any of them. Probationers, supposedly, according to your book, they do better than parolees. Evidence exists that a large proportion of offenders now incarcerated could have been placed on probation. Blah, blah, blah. And if you have 15 wards or juveniles on your caseload, then that's a great size caseload. It's really, really small. And you can probably do really good. It's really hard to say how effective probation is because there's so many factors. And, number one, the client. Number two, the probation officer. The issue, there's so much that could be involved in it, but how do you decide if someone is doing well on probation? Their rates of recidivism is typically what we want to find out. So if they reoffend, then they were not effective. This is a bunch of community-based sanctions and programs that are used for probation. Again, stuff we've talked about. So community-based sanctions, they could be at home on electronic monitoring or house arrest, or they could be on GPS, have a little GPS device. They could go to those residential day treatment programs where they go to school half the day, they attend treatment the other half the day, and then they go home at night. We talked about house arrest. We talked about electronic monitoring. House arrest to me is completely worthless because there's nothing that keeps other than the kid saying, "I promise I'll be home," there's no electronic supervision involved with that. So I think, again, house arrest is completely worthless, but electronic monitoring can be effective, and global positioning, or GPS. I just talked about a day treatment program. Group homes, you're familiar with those. Typically, that's when a young person, maybe their parents cannot handle them. They have needs that are beyond what a parent can handle, and they have gotten arrested. Sex offenders are real common group home placements because typically the juvenile sex offenders have molested one of their siblings, so they are not allowed to stay in the home and they have to go to a group home. Halfway houses are not something we typically use for juveniles in California. Wilderness programs, these used to be kind of all the rage, but now not quite as much. But we do have Valley Teen Ranch that's in Madera. That's kind of like a wilderness program where they kind of teach the youth how to deal with basically like more of a farm lifestyle. Skipping. Short-term confinement versus long-term confinement. Yes, typically juveniles are not held in jail unless they are out of sight of sound from any adults. I'm gonna skip through that. You know what a jail is. Jail is an adult facility. This is not actually everything in here. This whole description kind of talks about seems more like a juvenile hall, but we all know a jail is an adult facility where people 18 and older are held pending trial and sometimes after being convicted. Skipping boot camps. We talked a little bit about boot camps, and we used to have a boot camp program in Fresno County. Unfortunately, that got closed. Yeah, these are all other things that we have. Long-term confinements. There's a boot camp. There's an example of a boot camp program. Reception and diagnostic centers, ranches, wilderness camps, training schools. These are all programs. I don't think these are very commonly used, but they're all programs that could happen. Programs inside of a correctional facility. GED, of course, high school diploma. Some kids are even getting their junior high education in high school, not in high school, in custody. Training classes, vocational training, athletics, recreational activities, religious instruction, treatment, you name it. Do they have rights? Yes, juveniles. Juveniles have more rights in a custodial facility than do adults. They are required. They have a right to education. They obviously have a right to medical treatment, all that kind of stuff. They are to be Ooh, I didn't do that. They're to be cared for as if they were the children of the people running the facility. They have the right to access courts. So if there are issues and they're concerned with the way things are going in the juvenile hall, can a lawsuit be filed? Absolutely. They are to be free from cruel and unusual punishment, just like adults. Aftercare is something else that was pretty important in the rehabilitation process. And I talk about this a lot with the boot camp. Boot camp specifically, we had kids that would go there and completely change their lives over a period of 6 months. And then they would get out and they would go right back to the home that they came from and fall right back into their old practices. So that aftercare portion is really important in making sure that the treatment sticks, making sure that they have support when they get out of the facility to keep the positive progress. Excuse me. Blah, blah, blah. Aftercare. Yeah. Juveniles in adult prisons. 13 states permit the transfer of juveniles to adult facilities. These are some reasons for their transfers. In California, we do not hold anyone in prison who is under 18. In an adult prison, I should clarify. The Division of Juvenile Justice, which used to be CYA, is prison for kids. Yeah, I guess that's it. Oh, faster than I thought. Oops. I need to stop recording.